They tell me no Alpha King in living memory has thrown a feast like the one burning in my hall tonight, and they are right, and none of them know why I throw it. The great doors of Imberhall stand open to the cold, and the whole of the Silvermere has come across the water to stand inside my light. There are wolves here from 6 packs and 3 human towns, elders in fox fur and boys in borrowed cloaks, fiddlers on the gallery and 100 torches doubled in the black windows, and every one of them believes I do this because I am rich, because a king who has everything must spend it somewhere, because the Alpha of the North loves a crowd. Let them believe it. I stand at the top of my own stair with a cup I have not tasted in my hand, and I am not watching my guests at all. I am watching the far shore. Across the strait, low and pale on the near bank, the Hymir burns its own soft lamps, and somewhere under those lamps is the one window I have counted 1,000 nights. I keep a fire for that window. Up on the north point above my hall, past the last torch and the last laughing guest, a watchfire stands on a cairn of gray stone, and it burns from dusk to dawn every night of the year, tended by a boy I pay well to let no cold or rain put it out. My people think it is a beacon for ships. My captains think it marks the channel. It marks nothing but her. I built it so that on any night she cared to look, she would see one light on the far shore that never went out, and know without a word who kept it, and know that he came back, and know that he rose. 7 years I have kept that fire. 7 years since a landless wolf with no name worth speaking stood on the wrong side of this same water and watched them take her away. I was nothing then. I want to be honest about that, here in my own head where there is no one to impress. My father held 4 cold valleys and a debt, and when he died the debt outlived the valleys, and I came of age owning a good sword, a name no elder would seat at his table, and a heart that had already, foolishly, entirely, given itself to a girl I had no right to want. Her name is Saren. I have said it to myself so many times in the dark that it has worn smooth as a river stone. I met her the summer I was 21, when I crossed the Silvermere as a hired blade for a merchant train, and her father's outriders stopped us on the Hymir road. She was riding back from the healer's cottage with a basket of bound herbs across her saddle, because even then, even as the daughter of the wealthiest pack on the water, she spent her mornings among the sick who could not pay. She reined in beside our stopped train to see what the fuss was, and she looked at me, a road-dusty sellsword with nothing to his name, the way most high-born wolves never look at men like me. Not past me, at me, as if I were a person and not a fixture. "You're bleeding," she said. I was. A bandit's knife had opened my forearm 2 days north, and I had bound it badly. Before her father's man could tell her to ride on, she had swung down, taken my arm in her 2 hands, and unwound my clumsy bandage with fingers that did not flinch at the sight. She rebound it with linen from her own basket, quick and sure, and when she tied the last knot she looked up at me and I forgot the whole road, the whole train, the whole reason I had ever crossed the water. Something in me turned over that has never turned back. It was not my wolf rising, or a mark burning, or any of the grand omens the old songs promise. It was quieter and worse than that. It was recognition, the way you recognize your own name called across a crowded market, a certainty that arrived before I had time to argue with it, that this was the one the whole rest of my life would be arranged around. I did not tell her so. A man with nothing does not say such things to a girl with everything. But she came back to that stretch of road the next morning to check the wound, and the morning after, and by the end of that summer we had a bench under a leaning birch on the boundary of her father's land, where the water showed silver through the branches. And there we said, quietly, without any witness but a pair of curious wrens in the hedge, all the things we were forbidden to say. I told her I would earn a name. She told me she would wait to hear it. We were young enough to believe both. Her father did not believe either. Alpha Corlys of the Hymir had built his pack on trade and marriages, and he looked at his daughter the way a smith looks at good iron, as something to be spent well. When word reached him that his Saren was meeting a debt-poor sellsword at the boundary birch, he did not shout. Men like Corlys do not shout, they arrange. Within the month he had promised her, sealed and witnessed before the Mooncourt, to Alpha Garin of the Duskhallow, a pack richer even than the Hymir, whose lands ran gold with autumn wheat and whose Alpha wore his wealth on every finger. It was a fine match. It doubled Corlys's grain and tripled his standing. It was, everyone agreed, exactly what a daughter was for. I found out the way the poor always find out, last and by accident, from a fiddler in a tavern who did not know he was breaking me. I crossed the water that same night, swam the last of it when the ferryman would not take a man who could not pay. And I stood on the Hymir strand below her father's hall, while the alliance feast roared gold in every window. And I looked up at the one window I would spend the next 7 years counting, and I understood that I had come to say goodbye to something that was already gone. She found me. I will love her past the end of my life for that, if for nothing else. Near midnight she slipped from her own betrothal feast in her fine gray gown and came down to the cold strand where a wet, shaking, penniless wolf stood staring at her house, and she did not tell me it was hopeless, though it was. She took my face in her 2 hands the way she had taken my arm on the road. "They have promised me," she said. "The vow is sworn, I could not stop it." Her voice did not shake, which was worse than if it had. "But a promise sworn is not a bond, Aldrich. My father can trade my hand. He cannot trade the other thing. Do you understand me? He cannot reach the other thing." "Then don't let him," I said, which was a boy's answer. "I won't." She pressed something small and cold into my palm and closed my fingers over it, a ring of gray Silvermere pearl, her mother's, the one thing of true worth that was hers to give. "Go and become someone the Moon Court cannot ignore. Build a name so loud my father cannot pretend not to hear it. And on the night you have done it, light a fire on the far point where I can see it, and I will know you kept your word, and I will find a way to keep mine." She kissed me once, cold-mouthed and certain, and then she was gone up the strand toward all that gold, and I stood in the dark with a dead man's fortune worth of pearl in my fist and a task that should have been impossible. I made it possible. That is the part the songs would sing if they knew the truth, and the part I will not bore even myself with tonight. It took everything. I took the sword and the debt and the road, and I fought where fighting paid and traded where trading paid more, and I learned that the wealthy of the Silvermere are not clever, only early, that they hold the good land not because they are strong, but because no one has yet made them afraid. I made them afraid. I took 4 cold valleys that had been my father's and turned them into a stronghold, and then I took the passes above them, and then the packs who held the passes swore to me rather than freeze, and within 5 years the landless wolf who could not pay a ferryman was the Alpha King of the North, and the far shore of the Silvermere, the whole wild, burning shore across the water from her window, was mine from the point to the pines. But I want to set down one night of it, because it is the night that made a king out of a boy, and I have never told it to anyone. It was the second winter, the hard one, when I held 4 cold valleys and nothing else, and the wealthy packs of the high passes had decided to freeze me out, to close the trade roads above my stronghold, and let the snow do to me what they were too cautious to do with steel. My people were down to boiled leather and moss bread by the turn of the year, and my captains, good men all, had begun to look at me the way men look at a thing that is failing, and I did not blame them, and I did not sleep. I walked the wall of the stronghold every night in the killing cold with her mother's pearl closed in my fist inside my glove, and I made myself a promise there that I have kept, that I would stop being a man the wealthy could afford to wait out. There was a pass above me, the Greywind, that the 3 richest high packs used to move their winter grain to one another, and they thought it beyond my reach because it was above my valleys and defended by cold alone. I took it in the worst week of the year on foot, with 40 wolves who had nothing left to lose but me, and we did not take it by slaughter. I want that plain. We took it by arriving where arriving was thought impossible, by being on the high saddle in the white dark when the first grain train came through expecting only snow, and by making its outriders understand without a blade drawn, that the landless boy they had been comfortably starving was now standing on their throat in a blizzard and would be there every winter hence. I did not take their grain. I let the train pass. I only made sure that every high pack on the passes knew, by spring, that the Greywind belonged to me now, and that their comfortable arrangement of freezing out the poor depended from that day on my goodwill. That was the whole trick of it, and I learned it in one cold week. The wealthy of the Silvermere are not strong, only early, and they hold what they hold not because they cannot be moved, but because no one has yet been hungry enough to move them. I was hungry enough. Within 2 winters, the high packs who had tried to starve me swore to me rather than freeze in their own passes, and their grain that had been meant to break me built my hall instead, and the boy who could not pay a ferryman held the whole northern shore of the water, and through every hour of it, on every wall and in every white dark, her pearl was in my glove, and the one thought under all the cold was the same thought. Build a name so loud her father cannot pretend not to hear it. I was not building a kingdom. I never once was. I was building a voice loud enough to carry across a strait to one window, and the kingdom was only how loud it turned out I had to be. I built Imberhall on that shore on purpose. I built it tall and bright and impossible to ignore, in the one place on all my lands where its windows would face her house across the water. And I lit the watchfire on the point, as she had told me to, on the first night the hall's roof was closed. I remember that first night better than my own coronation, which came later and mattered less. The masons had set the last roof beam at dusk and gone down to their ale, and I climbed the north point alone in the dark with a lit brand, and a heart I could not govern, and I built the fire on the gray cairn with my own hands, a king kneeling in the wind, stacking driftwood like a boy. And when it caught, I stood back and I looked across the black water at the near shore where her house lay, and I found the one window I had counted from the cold strand 7 springs before, and it was dark. Of course it was dark, it was late, she could not have known the fire would come that night. But I stood there anyway with the flames throwing my shadow long down the point, and I said aloud to the water, to the dark window, to the whole cold width of the strait, I came back. I said I would, and I did. Look out your window some night and you'll see it. And then I went down to my new empty hall and lay awake, and in the small hours I got up and went to the point again like a lovesick fool to make sure the fire had not gone out. And across the water, that first night, one window on the near shore had come lit, later than any other, a small answering square of gold in all that dark. I did not know then whether it was hers. I chose to believe it was, and I fed the fire till dawn, and I have fed it every night for 7 years on the strength of that one late window, and now I know. She told me at the cottage, laughing and crying at once, that it was hers, that she had woken that first night to a light on the far point that had never been there before, and had known in her sleep-fogged heart exactly who had lit it, and had sat at her glass till dawn watching it burn, and had lit her own lamp so that if the wolf on the far point looked back, he would not be looking at nothing. We were answering each other across the water that very first night, and neither of us knew for 7 years that the other had answered. 7 years I have kept it. 7 years I have thrown these blazing feasts, and let all the water believe me a king in love with his own noise. And every one of those nights I have stood where I am standing now and watched the near shore for one window's light to change, for one small boat to put out, for any sign that she had seen the fire, and remembered the girl who told me to light it. She never came. 7 years and she never came, and I began, this past cruel winter, to let myself believe the worst thing, that a promise sworn under a leaning birch by 2 children does not survive 7 years of a rich man's haul, that she had made her peace with the gold, that the fire I kept was a fire I kept for a memory, and that I was the last fool on the Silvermere who did not know it. That is where I stood tonight, at the top of my own stair, cup untasted, watching the far shore go dark window by window as the near pack went to its beds, until a girl I did not know climbed my stair against the whole downward current of the crowd, planted herself in front of me, and said the word that ended 7 years of my life. "Cousin," she said, "you've been keeping a fire for my cousin." I looked down at her properly then. She was young, 19 perhaps, with a sharp, clever face and the gray Silvermere eyes I had drowned in on the Hymir road, though hers were amused where Saren's had been kind. She wore a courier's short cloak, mud on her boots, not a guest, a working girl who had talked her way in. "I keep a fire for the channel," I said, "because 7 years of guarding a thing teaches you to guard it even against hope. You keep a fire on the north point that can't be seen from the channel and can only be seen from 3 windows on the whole near shore, and one of them is my cousin Saren's," the girl said. "So let's not, you and I'm Wren. My mother was Saren's mother's sister, which makes me the poor cousin, which makes me useful, which is why I run letters for the Duskalo between the shores and know exactly which of the great and shining are lying about what." She tilted her head. "You're lying about a fire. She's lying about a window. I've watched her sit at it every night I've been in that house, and I finally got tired of 2 grown wolves being sad across a strait. So I came to a party I wasn't invited to tell the Alpha King of the North something his spies apparently won't. She looks at your fire every single night, and she has never once stopped." The cup went out of my hand. I did not see it fall, I heard it far off ring on the stone. "Say that again," I said. "Every night," Wren said, gentler now, because I suppose my face had stopped being a king's face. "She thinks nobody knows. She sits at the north window after the hall's asleep, and she watches the point until the fire burns low, and then she goes to bed and does it again the next night. 7 years, cousin. You lit a fire, and she has been reading it every night for 7 years, and neither of you has done a single useful thing about it because you're both too proud and too afraid and, forgive me, too grand. Kings and Lunas. If you were two ordinary wolves, you'd have swum the strait years ago. She's bonded, I said. The word tasted like the cold strand. She's Garen's mate. The vow was sworn before the moon court. There's nothing She's Garen's wife, Ren cut in, and the distinction landed like a struck bell. There's a word for it your Grand Council's use, and it isn't mate. And you know it, and she knows it. And here's the part your spies definitely won't have told you, because Garen spends good coin to keep it quiet. Garen knows it, too. There was never a bond. 7 years of a marriage, and there is no bond between them, none. The Moon Court's own reckoners could stand in that hall and find nothing to read. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He has her hand. Nobody has the other thing. She looked at me steadily with those gray eyes. She kept her word, cousin. Now what have you done with yours except set it on fire on a hill where she can look at it but never touch it? I have commanded men to their deaths with less trouble than it took me to keep my feet on that stair. Everything I had spent 7 years teaching myself to stop hoping came back into the room at once, and it was too big for the room, and I had to put my hand on the cold newel and breathe like a young wolf before I could speak like an old king. What do you want me to do? I said. Ren smiled, and I saw the family in it. Let me arrange a tea, she said. It was not a tea, but she called it that, and it makes me smile even now to remember how a king who had taken a mountain range was reduced, by the prospect of a small woman coming to a small room, to something less than the boy who had first bled on the Hymir Road. We did it carefully, because carefully was all we could afford. Garen of the Duskalo was proud and rich, and I would learn, dangerous in the particular way of a man who has begun to suspect his own possessions are less loyal than his ledgers say. If it were known that the lunar of the Duskalo had crossed the water alone to the Alpha King's Hall, it would not be read as a visit. So Ren arranged it as errand and accident. A shipment of northern furs the Hymir wanted to price, a factor's daughter sent to inspect them, a small cold cottage on my own strand where such business was done, and a king who happened to be walking his shore that same gray afternoon. I was there 2 hours early. I am not ashamed to write it. I had taken mountains, and I could not decide where to stand in a fisherman's cottage. I moved a chair 4 times. I had ordered the hearth banked high, and then thought it too warm and then too cold. I had, God help me, brought flowers, late asters from my own cold gardens, because I could not think what else a man brings across 7 years, and then hidden them behind the water jug because they seemed absurd, and then set them out again because hiding them seemed worse. When Ren's small boat finally scraped the shingle outside, I was standing in the exact center of the room like a man who has forgotten what rooms are for, and my heart was going like a boy's, and I had time to think, with a clarity that almost made me laugh, that of all the things my crown had bought me, it had not bought me 1 hour's peace from wanting her. The door opened, cold air, gray light, the smell of the strait. And then Saren stepped out of 7 years and into the doorway, and stopped, one hand still on the frame. She was not the girl on the road. She was better and she was sadder, which is what the years do to the ones worth loving. There was silver now at her temple that had not been there, and a stillness in her that a rich, cold house teaches a gentle woman, a way of holding herself very carefully as though she had learned that reaching for things got them taken. She wore fine gray wool and no gold at all. I noticed that, I have thought about it 100 times since, that the lunar of the wealthiest pack on the water came to me wearing nothing that shone. And on a plain cord at her throat, half hidden, was a ring of gray silvermere pearl. Not her mother's ring. Her mother's ring was in my breast against my heart, where it had lived for 7 years. She had found a second pearl somewhere, somehow, and worn it where her heart was, all this time, to match the one she'd given me. That undid me more than any grand omen could have. Whatever I had planned to say, and I had planned a great deal, kingly and composed, went out of me entirely. What came out instead, in the voice of the boy on the road and not the king on the mountain, was only, "You wore a pearl." Her hand rose to it. Her careful stillness cracked straight down the middle, and her gray eyes filled, and she said, "You kept the fire." "Every night." "I know." A tear went down her face, and she did not wipe it, as though she had waited 7 years to be somewhere she was allowed to let it fall. "I counted them, Aldrich, every single night. I told myself I was only checking that the point hadn't burned. 7 years I lied to myself at that window." She took 1 step into the room and stopped again, and I understood the stopping. She was a vowed woman standing in front of the only man she had ever wanted, and the whole weight of the moon court stood in the cold air between us. She would not cross it lightly. She had never once done a dishonorable thing, and she would not begin now, not even here, not even for this. So I did not close the distance either. I have wanted to every hour since, but I did not, because the thing between us was worth more than the wanting, and because a bond dishonored is a bond broken, and I had not spent 7 years earning her to steal her in a fisherman's cottage. We sat instead, one on either side of the banked fire, and we talked. We talked the whole gray afternoon out, and the flowers I had hidden came into it, and she laughed, really laughed, the road laugh, and it was like a window thrown open in a shut house. And I told her the true story of the mountains, the fear and the fighting and the 4 cold valleys, and she told me the true story of the Duskalo, which I will not set down in full because it is hers, but which came down to this: that Garin had married a beautiful alliance and lost interest in it within a year. That he kept his hall full of guests, and his life full of women who were not his wife. That he had never touched the bond because he had never once tried to reach it, being a man who valued only what he could count and finding a mate's heart nowhere in his ledgers. And that Saren had spent 7 years being the ornament of a rich, cold house, keeping his people fed and his healers stocked, and his name respectable, and looking every night at a fire on the far shore that was the only thing in the whole Silvermere that had ever been lit for her alone. We spoke of the birch, too, the leaning birch on the boundary where we had our bench, where 2 curious wrens had been our only witnesses. They cut it down, she told me, and I felt it like a small, clean grief. My father had it cut the spring after I was wed, the whole boundary hedge cleared for pasture, and I knew why, and I never said a word, because to complain would have been to admit there had been anything there worth cutting down. She turned the plain pearl at her throat between her fingers. But I kept a slip of it, a green shoot before the axes came. I've grown it 7 years in a pot on my north windowsill, next to the glass I watch your fire from, and no one has ever asked me why the Lunar of the Duskalo keeps a scrubby little birch in her private chamber when she could keep orchids. She looked up at me. It's as tall as I am now. I couldn't save the bench, Aldrich, or the years, or myself from the vow. But I saved the tree, and I saved the fire in my window, and I saved the pearl. And I told myself that as long as I kept those 3 things burning quietly where no one thought to look, I hadn't really surrendered. A woman can be an ornament in a rich man's hall, and still keep 3 small fires he never learns to see. I thought of my own 7 years then, the pearl in my glove on every frozen wall, the fire I fed on the point, the whole loud kingdom I built for 1 window. And I understood that we had spent the same 7 years doing the same secret thing on opposite shores, keeping small, stubborn flames alive against all that cold gold, each of us certain we were alone at it. We were never as far apart as the water made us look, I said, and she pressed her lips together and nodded, unable for a moment to speak. And outside the cottage the gray went a shade grayer, and neither of us moved to light a lamp, because the banked hearth was enough, and because after 7 years of watching fires across a strait it was a strange, sweet thing simply to sit on the same side of one. I could bear it, she said at the very end, as the gray went to dark outside and Wren's careful 2 hours had long since become 5. I told myself I could bear a life of ornament as long as the fire kept burning, because it meant somewhere across the water there was a wolf who lit a thing for me and asked nothing back. But you're not across the water any more, Aldrich. You're in the room. And I don't think I can go back to bearing it now that I've been in the room. Then don't go back, I said. She looked at me with all 7 years in her eyes. I'm vowed, she said. You know what that costs better than anyone. Break a moon court vow the wrong way, and it isn't just me, it's your crown, my father's pack, a war on the water. I won't buy an afternoon with a cottage full of dead wolves. If I come across that straight to you, Aldrich, I come across it clean before the whole court, with the law bowing me over, or I don't come at all. I've kept my word for 7 years. I won't ruin us both by breaking it in the dark. I have been called a hard man and a clever one. I have never in my life been prouder of anyone than I was of her in that moment, telling the Alpha King of the North that she would not be stolen, that she would be won properly or not at all. It is exactly why she is worth a mountain range. It is exactly the thing Garin, counting his fingers of gold, was too small ever to see. Then we do it clean, I said, before the whole court with the law bowing you over. I stood, and I did the thing I had wanted to do for 7 years and had no right to until she said that word. I crossed the room, and I did not take her in my arms. I took her hand, only her hand, the way she had taken mine on the road, and I bowed over it like the sellsword I had been. Give me until moon-high, I said. 6 weeks. Keep the fire in your window, and I'll keep mine on the point. And at moon-high, Before every pack on the Silvermere, I will win you back inside the law so cleanly that not one wolf on this water will be able to say the Alpha King stole another Alpha's Luna. Will you wait 6 more weeks?" She turned her hand in mine so that her fingers closed around it, and she said, "I've waited 7 years, Aldrich. What's 6 weeks to a woman who can count?" I will not pretend the 6 weeks were quiet. A king does not undo a moon court vow with longing. He undoes it with law, and law on the Silvermere is a slow and dangerous animal that must be fed exactly right, or it turns and eats the man who woke it. I spent those weeks the way I had spent the 7 years, working. But now I was working toward her instead of only under her fire, and it changed the taste of every hour. The hardest of those hours came at my own feast. I could not stop the revels without setting the whole water wondering what had changed the King of the North. And so in the 3rd week I threw the largest Imberhall had ever seen, and the Duskalo came across the straight to it in their gold, Garin at the head of them, and Saren at his side, publicly as his Luna, for all the shining crowd to see. We had agreed it must be so. We had agreed we would move through my own hall as near strangers, an Alpha King and a rival's Luna exchanging the cold courtesies the great exchange, and give not one wolf on the water a single thread to pull. It was the hardest agreement I have ever kept. She came up my own stair in gray and no gold with her hand on Garin's arm, and I bowed to her exactly as much as a king bows to a neighbor's Luna and not 1 degree more. And I said, "You honor my hall." And she said, "The king is generous with his fires." And the whole meaning of 7 years passed between us in those 2 flat sentences, while Garin looked bored beside her and counted the gold on the gallery. It nearly broke on us twice. Once when a fiddler struck up an old boundary tune we had both known as young wolves, and I saw her hand tighten on Garin's sleeve and her eyes come to me across the crowded hall before she could stop them. And I had to turn very deliberately to a passing elder and ask after his flocks so that no watching wolf would follow the line of her look and find me at the end of it. And once worse, near midnight, when the crush of the feast pressed us for 1 moment into the same corner of the gallery with only Ren between us, and Saren said under the noise, not turning her head, "I have counted the fire every night this week, and it has not failed once." And I said, not turning mine, "It will not fail." "Neither will I," and Ren, bless her sharp, clever soul, laughed loudly at nothing at all and steered a tray of cups between us and a knot of Hymir wolves who had drifted too near, so that anyone watching saw only the poor cousin being clumsy. And Garin watched. That was the thing I carried away from that feast and did not like, that under all his boredom, Garin of the Duskalo had begun to watch. Not me. He was far too proud to imagine the Luna he had ceased to want could be wanted by anyone worth his notice. He watched her. A man who values only what he can count grows suspicious. The moment a possession seems to have a worth he had not entered in his ledger. And somewhere in that loud gold night, he had noticed his ornament looking at a fire on a far point with a face he did not recognize. And it had made him, for the first time in 7 years, pay attention to her. Not with love, he had none, but with the sharp, small jealousy of a man who cannot bear that a thing he was about to throw away might be valued by another hand. I saw him take her arm and steer her early to their boat, and I saw the way his grip sat on her, and I stood at the top of my stair with a cup I did not taste, and understood that the 6 weeks had just grown teeth, and that I could not afford a single careless hour more before moon-high. The old law of the packs is not complicated, only jealously guarded. An arranged vow, a hand vow, sworn before the moon court for alliance binds 2 packs and 2 names. But it is a lesser thing than a true bond, and every reckoner on the water knows it, and the oldest law holds that a hand vow may be dissolved before the full moon court in 3 cases. If it was sworn under fraud, if it has borne no true bond in 7 years trying, or if the vowed mate has himself broken faith. Garin, in his pride, had handed me all 3. The fraud I could not use. Corlys had traded his daughter in the open, and shame is not the same as fraud. But the second case was Saren's own truth, 7 years and no bond, which the court's reckoners could confirm by simply standing in the same hall as the 2 of them and finding, in the place where a bond should sing, only silence. And the third case, the broken faith, was where I spent my weeks, because a court will free a woman from a barren vow reluctantly, but it will free her from a faithless one with relish, and I meant to give the court every reason to relish it. Garin had not only kept his hall full of women who were not his wife. That was common knowledge, and common enough among the great that it shamed him only a little. But a man who values only what he can count grows careless about what he cannot. And Ren, My sharp-eyed poor cousin Wren, who ran the Duskellow's letters and knew which of the great and shining were lying about what brought me the thing that mattered. "He's selling the winter grounds," she said, coming off the straight one gray dawn with mud to her knees and triumph in her clever face. "The high pastures above the Duskallow, where his own low families summer their flocks. He's promised them to the Marrowfin pack across the eastern ridge for a chest of gold, and a marriage he likes better than the one he's got. He means to set Saren aside after the harvest, quietly, a barren vow dissolution, all very sad and dignified, and take the Marrowfin Alpha's young sister instead, along with her dowry and her father's iron mines. He's been drafting it for a year. I've carried 3 of the letters myself and pretended I couldn't read." She held out a folded packet, sealed in Duskallow green. "I can read, cousin. And so can the Moon Court." I looked at the packet in her hand, and I understood that Garin had in his greed done the one thing that would ruin him. He had decided to throw Saren away for a richer match, and in doing so he had put in writing under his own seal both a broken faith to his Luna and a betrayal of his own low families, whose winter grounds he was selling out from under them for a chest of foreign gold. A court will free a woman from a faithless man. A pack will not follow an alpha who sells its children's pastures. Garin had signed away both his wife and his throne and did not know it, because he had counted only the gold coming in and never once the loyalty going out. "Does she know," I asked, "that he means to set her aside?" "No," Wren said. "She thinks she'll have to fight him for her freedom. She doesn't know he's already decided to give it to the wrong wolf, for the wrong reasons in a year's time, in a way that leaves her a discarded barren Luna and him a richer alpha with a younger bride." Wren's clever face went, for once, entirely serious. "You could let it happen, cousin. Wait a year, let him throw her out and pick her up off the strand a free woman with clean hands. It'd be safer." "No," I said, and I heard my own voice go cold and certain, the mountain voice. "He does not get to throw her away. That is the whole of it, Wren. 7 years he had a woman worth every valley I ever took, and he counted her as an ornament, and now he means to set her on the strand like a chipped cup. He does not get to be the one who ends it. She does, before the whole court with her head up, freed for his fault and not her own, and every wolf on this water watching him lose the thing he never once bothered to want." I folded the green packet into my breast beside her mother's pearl. "We don't wait a year, we do it at Moonhigh, and we do it clean." The last week nearly undid all of it. Garin's new watching had made the Duskallow a harder house to carry letters out of, and the final proof I needed, the sealed treaty draft with the Marrowfin Alpha's own counterseal on it, the one page that would let no wolf at Moonhigh call the letters forged, sat in Garin's own strong room, and it was Wren who had to bring it across the water. She was nearly caught doing it. Garin's steward, grown suspicious of a poor cousin who ran more errands than a poor cousin needed, stopped her at the Duskallow gate the very night she carried it, and searched her satchel by torchlight while she stood there with her clever face gone empty and pleasant, and the folded treaty sewn into the lining of her own cloak, a hand's breadth from his fingers. He found her courier's letters, all dull and legitimate, and he let her pass, but she came across the strait to me shaking for the first time since I had met her, and she put the Marrowfin page into my hands and said, "That is the last thing I carry out of that house, cousin. Whatever you're going to do it at Moonhigh, because after tonight the steward will not let me near the strong room again, and I think Garin has started to guess that the fire on your point was not lit for ships." I looked at her shaking, this sharp, brave girl who had crossed a strait 100 times to unbend 2 proud grown wolves too afraid to bend themselves, and I understood what it had cost her, and what it would cost her still if it went wrong. Because a poor cousin who is caught helping to unmake her rich cousin's marriage does not get a king's protection unless the king wins. "It ends at Moonhigh," I promised her. 6 days. You've carried the last of it. Now it's mine to carry, and if any wolf on this water is to pay for these letters, it will be Garin, and it will be me, and it will not be you. You have my word on it, and you have seen what my word does when I give it. I sent word to Saren too, by the one safe channel left to us, a fishwife of the near shore who owed the Hymir nothing and me a great deal. Only 3 lines unsigned, that I had all I needed, that she must do nothing, risk nothing, change nothing, only keep her window lit and her head down for 6 days more, that at Moonhigh, before the whole court, the law would bow her over clean. She sent 3 lines back by the same fishwife, and I have them still, folded against her mother's pearl. I have done nothing but wait for 7 years. I am very good at it now. Light the point. I'm watching. And I lit the point every one of those 6 nights and stood beneath it in the cold, and across the black water one window on the near shore stayed lit late every night, later than any other. A small answering light that told me she was at the glass, reading my fire, counting down the last 6 nights of a thing 7 years long. Moon High comes once a year to the Silvermere, when the full moon stands highest, and the moon court sits in open session on the neutral strand at the water's narrowest point, and every pack and alpha and lunar on the strait is bound by the oldest law to attend. It is the one night no great wolf can refuse to stand before the reckoners. It is the one night Garin of the Duskalo could not decline to answer. I had chosen it the moment Saren said the word clean, and I had spent 6 weeks making sure that when the court sat, everything it needed would already be in its hands. Neutral Strand at Moon High is a sight even a king does not forget. They build the moon court on the shingle at the Narrows, a ring of gray standing stones old before any pack's memory, and inside the ring the reckoners in their pale robes, and around the ring the whole shining crowd of the Silvermere in their furs and their gold, torches down to the waterline and the full moon laying a road of silver straight across the strait from shore to shore. Imberhall's fires burned on my side. The Hymir's lamps burned on hers. And between them, on the cold, neutral shingle, the two shores of my whole life came together for one night under the law. I came across the water in my own boat with my captains behind me and Wren at my side, and I did not look at the crowd, though the crowd looked at me. The Alpha King of the North does not attend Moon High most years, and my coming had set the whole strand humming. I looked for her. And I found her standing among the Duskalo on the near side of the ring in gray wool and no gold, with a plain pearl at her throat, her head up, her face very still, and Garin beside her, gold on every finger, tall and handsome and bored, with no idea none that he had come to Moon High to be undone. The court sat. The reckoners called the season's business, a boundary dispute, a trade vow, a fostering, and the shining crowd shifted and murmured, waiting for the great matters. And when the eldest reckoner, a white-muzzled woman with eyes like river ice, asked in the old form whether any wolf present would bring a matter before the moon court under the oldest law, I stepped into the ring of stones, and the whole strand went silent as a held breath. I would, I said. Garin laughed. I will remember that laugh with a certain gratitude for the rest of my life, because it was the last easy thing he did. The King of the North honors us, he said loud for the crowd, a rich man performing ease. What matter could the Lord of 4 cold valleys and a great many torches bring to the moon court? Have you run short of firewood, your grace? I'd hate to think that fire on your point was burning up your whole inheritance. A ripple of laughter went round the shining crowd. They liked their alphas witty. Garin smiled, pleased with himself, counting, always counting, the small coin of the crowd's amusement. I bring a matter of a broken vow, I said, and I did not raise my voice because the mountain voice does not need raising. Under the oldest law in all 3 cases, and I bring it against you, Alpha Garin of the Duskalo. The laughter stopped. The white-muzzled reckoner's eyes came up. State it, she said. I stated it. I am told I stated it well. I do not remember the words so much as the faces, Garin's going from amused to affronted to, at the very last, afraid. I said that the hand vow between the Duskalo and the Hymir, sworn 7 years past for alliance, had borne no true bond in all that time, that the court's own reckoners might stand where they stood and read the silence between this Alpha and this Luna, and find nothing there to read. A murmur ran the crowd. The reckoners looked at each other. And the white-muzzled one rose and walked the slow ceremonial circle around Saren and Garin that the old law prescribes, her eyes half closed, listening the way only reckoners can listen. And when she had made the full circle she stopped, and she said, in a voice that carried to the water line, There is no bond here, 7 years and no bond, the king speaks true. It should have been enough, a barren vow is grounds. But a barren vow alone would have freed Saren sadly. A dissolution, a shared blame, a woman quietly returned to her father as goods that did not take. That is not what I had crossed the water for. So before Garin could gather his affront into a speech, before Corlys on the Hymir side could begin arranging, I said the second thing. And there is broken faith, I said, not hers, his. And I drew the green-sealed packet from my breast and held it up in the torchlight for the whole court to see. Alpha Garin has for a year been in secret treaty with the Marrowfen pack across the eastern ridge, to sell them the high winter grounds above his own hall, the pastures where his own low family summer their flocks, for a chest of foreign gold and a marriage he preferred to the one he swore. He meant to set aside his Luna after the harvest as barren, keep the blame on her, and take the Marrowfin bride and her father's iron in her place. He has broken faith with his mate, and he has broken faith with his own pack, and he has done both in his own hand, under his own seal, which I now give to the court to read. I have stood in battles quieter than the moon court went. The white-muzzled reckoner took the packet, and broke the green seal that was Garen's own, and read it in the silver light while 5,000 wolves held their breath. And then she read the worst of it aloud in the old carrying voice, the promise of the winter grounds, the chest of gold, the young Marrowfin bride, the setting aside of the barren Luna after harvest, all of it in Garen's own careless hand. And I watched the shining crowd of the Silvermere turn on him the way a crowd turns, all at once, like a school of fish. I watched the Duscalow's own low families come to Moonhigh in their borrowed cloaks, understand that their alpha had sold their children's pastures for a foreign chest. I watched the great and glittering who had laughed at his wit a moment before, edge one careful step away from a man who had just been shown to break faith in writing. And I watched Garen of the Duscalow understand, at last and far too late, that he had counted everything except the moment when everyone stopped pretending not to see him. He did what men like him always do at the end. He reached for force. "This is a theft," he snarled, and the boredom was gone and the ugly thing under it was out at last. "A king with too many torches and an eye on my wife, dressing a robbery in old law. Those letters are forged. I'll answer this the old way, Northerner, if you've the belly, steel, and the moon over the neutral strand, alpha to alpha, and we'll see whose faith the court reads then." He meant the lawful challenge, the last resort of the moon court when law itself is disputed, alpha against alpha under the reckoner's eyes, first blood or yield. He thought, I suppose, that a king who had spent 7 years building fires had gone soft behind his walls. He had forgotten, or never learned, that I did not build the north with torches. I built it with a good sword from nothing, against men far harder than a Wheatrich alpha who had never in his life had to fight for a thing he wanted. "I've the belly," I said, "but not for your sake, for hers, so that no wolf on this water can ever say she was freed by a trick and not by the law." I looked past him once to Saren, standing very still with her head up and her gray eyes on me, and I saw her give me the smallest nod, permission and faith together, and it was worth more than the crown. "Draw, Garen. And when you yield, you'll yield your claim on a woman you were about to throw away before the whole court, so she leaves you free and clean and blameless. That's the theft I came for."